Hello guys, my name is RUssianBadger, and welcome back to my Engineer Class Weapon Guide. Now what this is going to do is, it's going to provide you with all the statistics of the weapons of the Engineer class, in addition to my perhaps misguided and probably irrelevant personal insights and opinions on these weapons. And hopefully after you're done watching this guide, you will be more efficient with the various guns in the class, and also feel as if I've not wasted your time. And just so you guys know, I'm going to pronounce so many things incorrectly. Like, you guys already know that I trail off enough, and I say things in derp and, like, completely mispronounce things already. But I'm probably going to make the mistake of, and I know a lot of you spontaneously spawn, like, a brain hemorrhage when I do this, but I'm probably going to say carbine instead of carbine. And I know that really ruffles your feathers and or your jimmies, so what I'm going to do is this. I will do my very best to give you the information that I think is relevant to you, and leave the rest out. I mean, I think some things associated with these weapons are really useless. Like, does me calling it a carbine versus a carbine really change the stats of the weapon? No. Does me telling you what country the gun comes from provide you with any sort of in-game benefit? No. So, long story short, I will do my very best to give you the information that you can use and skip everything else that is largely irrelevant. So, in terms of format, we're going to go like this. We're going to start with reloading and attachments, and then move on to damage characteristics, and finally on to the individual engineer weapons themselves. I may even include like a bonus clip with some sort of Mozart piano or something like that. But that depends on whether or not I approve your conduct, and you guys probably know that most frequently I never approve of anybody's conduct. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the reloading and attachments. Oh, one more thing! Like, as always, I think you guys already expect this, but if you don't want to hear me blab on about different engineer weapons, you can skip to specific ones in the description. It's like the table of contents, just so I don't waste your time any further, because I know these things are usually very long, and you guys are all very esteemed businessmen that have really nice business cards and everything else. So there's a table of contents if you want to skip between the different weapons and you don't want to watch the entire thing. So that is all down below. Like I said, let's move on to reloading and attachments in the first section of the guide. First off, I would like to say that some of this is preference and some of this is not. I think in terms of the first slot, just use what you're comfortable with. Like, you know, some people like the holographic side instead of the Cobra side and so forth, so I think the first attachment should widely be your choice, but for the second slot, things are very, very different. And what I mean by this is, I do not run the foregrip on any of the engineer weapons. I mean this mainly because, okay, you look at it this way. Bro Cookie, the foregrip decreases your recoil, but increases your spread. I just don't run it. Like, I usually run with no second slot attachment. I know some people run bipods and other things of that sort, but I really think about it this way. Okay, in my opinion, I would rather have less spread but more recoil, because for the most part, I can manage and contain my recoil very well. I think that increased spread is not only more annoying, but it certainly isn't as easy to manage, and that's simply why I run the second slot empty instead of using the foregrip, because I would much rather manage recoil instead of spread. This is the way I look about it. And the third slot is another component that is sort of up for debate. I mean, as a general rule, I know if you're going to be playing on a larger map, I will most likely suggest that you choose a carbine with a lower rate of fire and smack a heavy barrel on the end, because the increased range is very, very noticeable with that attachment. And for close quarters, I usually run a laser sight. You know, like Operation Metro, Grand Bazaar, just my playstyle in general on those close quarter maps really involves a lot of frequent hip firing, and that is largely the reason why I use a laser sight on the tighter maps. But, yes, I know that some of you like to be really covert, all like Crisis and run around with a flash suppressor or suppressor, but I really don't succeed very well in those stealthy roles that some of you really like to adopt, so I haven't really had much success with those attachments. I don't know, I just have a hard time being really silent and covert and MLG Pro, like crouch walking or prone walking everywhere when I'm funneled into a choke point. I just don't get it. I'd rather just get my hands dirty by either sticking on a heavy barrel or a laser sight for the last attachment, but as always, I would find the third slot attachment that best suits your specific playstyle. I mean, we all play differently. Some are more aggressive, some are more conservative, some are in between, but definitely find the third slot attachment that is best for you. I don't think you can really go wrong with heavy barrel or laser sight on a lot of your weapons, but yet again, find what is best for you. And beyond attachments, reloading is another point that I would like to address briefly. for those of you that are unaware, the engineer weapons reload at a slower rate if you expend all of the bullets in your current magazine compared to if you don't. So if you fire 30 rounds of some catfish, you reload at a slower rate compared to if you only fired 12 rounds, for example. Also, some of you seem a little bit puzzled that, like, okay, if you have 30 rounds in a magazine, then why is your standard capacity 31 rounds? Well, that's because it's something called around the chamber. I know I've addressed this in the past, but allow me to cater to the lowest common denominator. Okay, there's 30 rounds in your current magazine, or in a standard magazine of an SMG or a carbine or one of the engineer class weapons. You put 1 round in the chamber with a total of 31, right? So you got 30 in a magazine, 1 in the chamber, that's 31 rounds. That math is so complex. And okay, this extra round can be achieved by either reloading twice or reloading before you've expended all of the rounds in your magazine. I don't know if you guys see that extra bullet as an added benefit, and I've sort of debated this with you guys on the past videos, but I would like to inform you anyways. I don't know if an extra bullet really means anything to you. Maybe that's the difference between you getting the kill and him killing you, but moving on, we will now discuss damage characteristics. Every engineer weapon has a maximum and minimum damage, and this can easily be summated by just saying the closer you are to someone, the more damage you deal to an extent. So, to put it for you visually, all of the engineer weapons do a maximum damage at any distance inside about 10 meters, and they deal a minimum damage at any distance outside of 50 meters. In addition to these maximum minimum damages, there are also damage multipliers. So there's a damage multiplier of 2.0 for headshots if you hit the guy in the dome piece. There's a 1.0 multiplier for the chest and arms, that includes your belly or anywhere in the torso section, and a 0.9 multiplier for the legs or the kneecaps, as I always like to shoot for. So headshots deal twice as much damage as body shots, and leg shots deal 10% less damage than body shots. That's pretty simple to know. And yes, there are some of you that try to correct me in the assault rifle guide and on previous videos, but those of you that say that there's a 1.25 damage multiplier to the chest are completely wrong. Like, I just feel like saying erroneous, that's wrong. That's just straight up wrong, bro cookie, that's just wrong. The 1.25 multiplier to the chest is for some of the sniper rifles and recon weapons. There is not a 1.25 multiplier for any of the assault rifles or the engineer weapons. So those of you saying 1.25, not correct. It is 2.0 to the head, 1.0 to the chest, and 0.9 to the kneecaps. The end. So with all this preliminary information out of the way, we can finally plunge into the individual weapons, starting with my personal favy, the M4A1. The M4A1 has a max damage of 25 and a minimum damage of 14.3, firing at a rate of 800 rounds per minute with a magazine size of tray 0 rounds. It reloads in 2.6 seconds while empty and 1.9 seconds while not, making it the fastest reloading engineer weapon, and it's capable of firing both fully automatic and single firing modes. And the reason that I like it is just because it's so versatile and can do pretty much anything to an extent. We'll talk about the range, but really, if I were running around robbing banks all whacked up on Scooby snacks, I would probably want to be wielding an M4A1. That's just how much I love it. It kills the fastest among all the weapons in the engineer class, of course tied with the A91 at 800 rounds per minute. It also reloads extremely quickly and has consistent recoil. However, this is sort of where you're probably going to run into some issues with the M4A1. After the patch, DICE gave the carbines with high rates of fire much higher initial recoils compared to their slower firing counterparts. That means when you first start to fire the M4A1, the recoil is drastically high and then tapers off as you continue to expend rounds. And this is really, I don't want to say it's extremely annoying, but it's definitely a prominent setback on the M4A1 is the range. Just that initial recoil. You know, not that the M4A1 is really bad at range, it can be decent at range, but when you're frequently going against somebody else and that catfish has like an assault rifle or an LMG or a slower firing carbine, they'll probably outclass you at that distance and they will kill you and you will not kill him. But overall, I really enjoy the M4A1, not only because it kills fast, but because I can lay down constant fire. You know, that extremely fast reload time lets me hold down a specific choke point, or all of Operation Metro, which is one giant choke point in itself. I got an idea, guys. Let's make a map. Oh, but instead of a map, it'll just be a big choke point. Brilliant. Never mind. But I can easily tell you that I get shot in the face a lot less while reloading compared to, like, when I'm using the M4A1, I rarely ever get shot while reloading because the reload is so quick. So all that annoyance of, oh god, I only died just because he shot me while I was reloading, a lot of that problem is alleviated with the M4A1 because it's just pop, 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 and magazine is done, you got fresh rounds, and you're ready to go. Just because it is mag in, mag out very, very quickly. So if you're unsure about which engineer weapon will bring you success and prosperity, I definitely recommend the M4A1. I truly love it. So the next weapon on the list is the AKS-74U. The AKS-74U has a max damage of 25 and a minimum damage of 14.3, firing at a rate of 650 rounds per minute with a magazine size of 30 rounds. It reloads in 3 seconds while empty and 1.9 seconds while not, and that is fairly fast, bro cookie. It's capable of firing fully automatic and single firing modes, and I personally call this thing the Axe. And the reason that I call it the Axe, beyond the pronunciation of AKS-74U sort of looking like axe to me, is that I always ask myself the question. When I see an enemy from far away, and I ask myself the question, can I kill that guy from here? Like, do you really think I could take that guy down from this distance with this gun? I always ask myself that question. And you know what? It just so happens that I usually can, and I usually can kill him, and that's really what is going to surprise you about the AKS-74U. The range. I know it sounds weird. I know. Like, engineer weapons, those aren't designed to be tremendous at range. The assault rifles are good at range. Like, LMGs are good at range. Like, engineer weapons are not designed to do that. But still, the low rate of fire and the low initial recoil really make the weapon excellent at those medium ranges. And it's because of this that I almost always recommend the heavy barrel attachment. And believe me, you will notice a gigantic difference. So, yes, on some maps, I sometimes decide to use the laser sight, mainly because the weapon struggles in close quarters due to the low rate of fire, but not usually. Like, if I'm constantly getting thrashed at close range, like I'm just getting raffle stomped, I'll slap on a laser sight, and that'll help me out in that department, but for the most part, I really do suggest the heavy barrel. Now, obviously you can't have everything, especially when it comes to the engineer class. Like, they're all give and take. Like, yes, the AKS-74U is great at medium range and beyond, where the M4A1 is fairly bad, but in close quarters, the M4A1 absolutely just melts the AKS-74U in terms of how fast it kills or how quickly it kills you. So it really is all about tailoring your weapon to the map and the situation, and that's especially prevalent with the AKS-74U. And yet again, I want to mention this. They did fix the bug with this weapon from the previous patch. Before the patch, it had some sort of glitch where it did more minimum damage at like the longest distance compared to the other SMGs and the other carbines. Like, for some reason it was a glitch where it did more damage than them, and they fixed that, so that bug of higher minimum damage than the other engineer class weapons is completely fixed and completely gone. So overall, the weapon is great at medium range and is just plain accurate, but it does suffer from some close range engagements. And allow me to tell you that the Axe it's so wonderful, but the thing is, you're still going to have to get used to it because it's annoying at close range, but medium range is just so great. And the one last thing that I want to say about the Axe is, what are the 5 best attachments of all time? And if you answered anything other than heavy barrel, heavy barrel, heavy barrel, heavy barrel, and heavy barrel, you're completely wrong, because just run the heavy barrel and this weapon is wonderful. The end. Next on the list is the SG-553. The SG-553 has a max damage of 25 and a minimum damage of 14.3, firing at a rate of 700 rounds per minute with a magazine size of 30 rounds. It reloads in 2.65 seconds while empty and 2.15 seconds while not, which is fairly quick, and it's capable of firing fully automatic, burst, and single fire. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I really don't enjoy this weapon. You see, I think this gun just doesn't know what it wants to be. Like, is it going to be this gun that just shreds people at close range at something like the A91 or the M4A1, or is it some sort of distance champion like the AKS-74U? It's not any of those, and it just isn't as versatile as many of the other engineer weapons. You see, for a weapon with a low rate of fire at 700 rounds per minute, you would think that it would have pretty good range. Well, not so much for the SG-553. It's really got a lot of high initial recoil, and it's that type of kick that just bounces around. Like, is this like a bouncy cap? It's like one of those blow up bouncy castles, and your reticle just goes everywhere. Now, not that you can't get enemies at medium range. Like, just because the recoil is sort of goofy doesn't mean that you can't get them at medium range, but most of the time, you're probably going to be using your entire magazine, if not more. Now, don't get me wrong, the SU-553 is not... It's not a terrible weapon. I know that some of you really love it, but when I compare it to similar alternatives like the G36C or the G53, I really don't see any reason to use it. And even beyond the stats, I continually play with this weapon for like several hours, and though it wasn't horrible, I can tell you that I definitely had more success with something like the M4A1 or the G36C under similar circumstances. I don't know, it's not great at anything. It doesn't kill as fast as most of the other carbines in close quarters, and it really isn't as successful at medium range as the slower firing engineer weapons. I've tried it on full auto, on burst fire, on single fire, and it just isn't that baller. It's just not balling to me. That's all that it is. But, you know, if you like it, more power to you. I know some of you really like weapons that I don't really take... I'm not very fond of, or I don't really enjoy. I know some weapons that I just hate, a lot of you may just love, so I'm going to go ahead and pass that on to you, whether you want to use it or not, and have you make up your mind whether it's a great weapon or not. That's my opinion. I don't think it's a very good weapon when you compare it to something like a G53 or the G36C. It just doesn't compare to me. It's just too inferior, in my opinion. But the next weapon on the list is the M4. The M4 has a maximum damage of 25 and a minimum damage of 14.3, firing a rate of 800 rounds per minute with a magazine size of 30 rounds. It reloads in 2.6 seconds while empty and 1.9 seconds while not, making it the fastest reloading engineer weapon, obviously tied with the M4A1. It's also capable of firing burst and single fire, and I know a lot of you think this, but don't think that, oh, it's burst, better go get my bipod and my suppressor and become a bush monster in this bush 5 miles away from the objective drinking my camp sauce. The rifle is really not like that, and as you can tell, the M4 has the exact same stats as the M4A1, except now, after the patch, DICE made changes to the recoil and the spread of this weapon. Similarly to what they did with the M16A3 and A4, they made the burst version M4 much more accurate and suited for longer range engagements. They increased the vertical recoil, but decreased the horizontal recoil and the spread in order to make the weapon much better at medium range in terms of accuracy. Like, it is noticeably better, but I still think the M4A1 is superior to the M4. You know, although the rate of fire is technically the same for both weapons, even though the M4 is burst and the M4A1 is automatic, the burst fire is just really awkward in close quarters. I just find it's so goofy. It's like, I don't know, it's just not as efficient as the automatic fire in close quarters. That's just my opinion, and also, too, you can always just set the M4A1 to automatic and then just tap fire it manually. Obviously, that works for me really well. Obviously, you can't change the recoil values and you can't change the spread values, but I usually like to just put the M4A1 to automatic and burst fire or single fire manually. That just seems a lot easier to me. And finally, I just don't see the... I don't see the utility in having a burst submachine gun that is all that great at range. Like, your bullets do so little damage over that distance compared to assault rifles and light machine guns that even if you end up engaging someone at that distance and completely outplaying them with your accuracy, they may still win the gunfight simply because, oh, their bullets have less damage drop off and they hit harder than yours. So I recommend sticking with the M4A1 if you choose to pick one of the M4s in game, but yet again, the final decision is always yours, sir, so do as you wish. And the next weapon on the list is the A91. The A91 has a max damage of 25 and a minimum damage of 14.3, firing a rate of 800 rounds per minute with a magazine size of 30 rounds. It reloads in 3.3 seconds while empty and 2.62 seconds while not. Nice one, Slowpoke! Like, just think about that. That guy needs to work on his forearms or, like, do some extra squats or something, because that is extremely slow. That is just... That's not cutting it, man. That's really slow. But, okay, it's capable of firing both fully automatic and single firing modes, and overall is somewhat similar to the M4A1. It's another one of these carbines that just melts people at close range because of the high rate of fire, but it really suffers at medium range and beyond. And what makes this weapon so dreadful at this distance is the overwhelming horizontal recoil. You know, like, most engineer weapons and most weapons in the game for that matter have consistent recoil, whether it be completely vertical or up and to the right, which makes this recoil so awkward. It's not even so much the recoil bounces, but it just appears to be so random. Like, it's so random when you're engaging somebody at medium range. It's very, very goofy to see. And in addition to that, the initial recoil is the highest in the engineer class, so in terms of anything regarding recoil, the AN91 just got shafted. Like, bro Cookie, you got the short end of the stick when it came to recoil. The A91 is just literally just straight up shafted when it came to recoil. The A91, recoil awful. But just like the other carbines with the high rates of fire, it is really just designed for melting people at close quarters. Like, the amazing hip fire is just like, it's almost like you're using a Flammenwerfer. You know the thing that Werft Flammen? It just melts people. But the other thing is, the trade-off is that once that person runs away, or if that person is beyond like 20 meters, you're just boned. Like, it is not good beyond that distance. And if you don't believe me, try it out for yourself. Like, it melts people at close quarters, but it's not good at range. And when you're comparing it to the M4A1, I know a lot of you like these comparisons between really similar engineer weapons. I think I have to give the edge to the M4A1 because it reloads much faster than the A91, but one of you on the last video mentioned something that I did not catch, and I know this now. Okay, this is the catch. Because the A91 is a bullpup carbine, meaning that the magazine sits behind the trigger, or it's like near the back, DICE has made it so that these bullpup rifles are much more maneuverable when you're aiming down sight. So perhaps more maneuverability or speed, walking speed while you're aiming down sight, that may make you want to use the A91 over the M4A1, but still regardless, I enjoy using both weapons because they just raffle stomp people at close range. But in the end, I still prefer the M4A1 because I think a far better reload time is more convenient than better mobility while aiming down sight with the bullpup A91. That's just my personal preference because I think reloading is really, really important. So, just my personal preference. I know a lot of you're gonna say, "Bro, Cookie, that's wrong. I like the A91." Well, yeah, personal preference. Okay, reloading I think is more important than mobility. The next weapon on the list, I always do that with the G36C. I always get like, it's such a good weapon, I almost like foam at the mouth. Okay, the next weapon on the list is the G36C. The G36C has a max damage of 25 and a minimum damage of 14.3, firing at a rate of 750 rounds per minute with a magazine size of 30 rounds. It reloads in 2.85 seconds while empty and 1.9 seconds while not, which is fairly speedy, and it's capable of firing fully automatic, burst, and single firing modes, and in my opinion is basically an SG-553 that doesn't suck. It fills that role of somewhat of a middle ground between the engineer weapons that are really great at medium range and those that are really I was going to say glow, but I said glow does not really, doesn't make sense with the engineer weapons, but it really is a middle ground between those that are really great at long range and those that are really great at close range. You know, despite the fact that it's slightly more oriented towards close quarters, I see this weapon as extremely versatile. It has balanced recoil, and I don't know if you guys are really going to follow me on this, but it's like what the M249 SAW was pre-patch. It has recoil values that are equal to the right, to the left, and vertically, so it really bounces around, but I really enjoy this recoil. It's not like the M4A1 where you may shoot above your target due to the recoil, or the A91 where you may miss your target to the left or to the right because of your recoil. The G36C just seems to float around your target, and if you're conservative with your bursts, you can easily put down enemies very, very quickly at range, despite the fact that I get really carried away with nearly fully automatic fire. I like to think it's burst, but it's really close to automatic fire. So, in terms of range, the G36C performs very well, and although it's not dominant at range like the AKS-74U, it's certainly successful in that department. And also, too, the 750 rounds per minute serves very well in close quarters. It's not quite the 800 rounds per minute of the A91 and the M4A1 that melts people like a Flammenwerfer that Werft Flammen, but it certainly does work well in close quarters. And really, that's what the G36C is. It's good at everything, but it's not dominant in anything. And if that... I'm trying to think, if all this hasn't really convinced you yet as to why this weapon is so wonderful, it also has a quick reload time if you contain rounds in your current magazine. If you get rid of if you get rid of all your bullets, the reload time is a little bit slower than a lot of other weapons, but I definitely recommend this weapon for its versatility, and if you're even thinking about using the SG553, just stop, call yourself a Carl, and use the G36C, because it's clearly superior. The next weapon on the list is the Scar H. Now first off, I don't even know how to... I guess it's called the Scar H, but I could also see it misinterpreted like you're trying to pronounce it like you're a pirate. Scar, or like your gangplank, like landlubber, or something like that. I don't know exactly how to say this. I guess it's just Scar H, but I also thought maybe if you switch the H and the C, that makes it shark in a peculiar spelling, right? S-H-A-R-C, I guess that makes sense, but it has a maximum damage of 30 and a minimum damage of 20, firing a rate of 600 rounds per minute with a magazine size of 20 rounds. 20 rounds, that's not enough, if you ask me, but it reloads in 2.85 seconds while empty and 2.25 seconds while not, making it the fastest reloading engineer weapon, tied with the M4A1. Not really. I was going to say that just to juke you guys out, just to see if you were still paying attention. It's really not even close to the M4A1, because the M4A1 is baller in terms of its reload, and the Scar is really not, but that was just to keep you on your toes, see if you were still paying attention to reload times. I know a lot of you just put it in the back of your brain, but it's capable of firing fully automatic and single fire, and is obviously very unique when it comes to a comparison with the other engineer weapons. The first thing that you're going to notice is that you will have tremendous success with this weapon at range. Just the fact that it takes fewer amounts of bullets to kill somebody at range with the Scar compared to other engineer weapons makes your job so much easier at those distances. So instead of having to hit the guy like 6-7 times the longer ranges, you only have to hit him 5 times with the Scar. I also think that I have marginal success with this weapon at close range, but that's sort of where the flaws kick in. So number one, you're going to rage over the 20 round magazine. Like, maybe not all of you, but if you transition from like an LMG or a 30 round assault rifle over to the Scar, it will be a little bit awkward, just to say the least. If you're used to taking out 3 or more enemies with one magazine or one big box from an LMG or whatever you're using, you're definitely going to be disappointed by the 20 round magazine. Like, I frequently die while reloading with the Scar because the magazine is just so small, but if you can manage your shots and your reloading is effective or done at the appropriate times, the Scar will reward you handsomely. Like, the recoil I really enjoy. It has that equal horizontal and vertical recoil like the, what was it? It was the G36C, so it almost creates an aura of bullets around the target, but if you can manage to stay to short bursts or tap fire, you will definitely be fine in terms of the recoil. So overall, it's great at the longer ranges and can get it done in close quarters, but just be mindful of the effect that the 20 round magazine has on your engagements with the enemy. Sometimes I tend to forget about that and end up getting shot in the face with 0 bullets in my magazine. So the next weapon on the list is the G53. The G53 has a max damage of 25 and a minimum damage of 14.3, firing a rate of 750 rounds per minute with a magazine size of 30 rounds. It reloads in 3.2 seconds while empty and 2.3 seconds while not, and I don't even know how to feel about that. By no means is it good, but by no means is it bad. It's like, I don't even know what you are. It's so middle ground with the whole reload time. It's decent, okay? It's decent. It's capable of firing fully automatic, burst, and single firing modes, and it's very similar to the G36C. In addition to the same damage, magazine size, and rate of fire, they also share identical spread values. Where they differ is recoil values. Not only does the G53 have more initial recoil, it also pulls more sharply to the right, whereas the G36C, you know, that bouncy, like blow-up castle recoil is in all directions. So, just like its counterpart, the G53 succeeds in close quarters and performs decently at medium range as well, but yet again, just like the G36C at range, the G53 works well, but is by no means, like, it's not dominant. It works well, but it's not dominant. Now, even though these weapons are very similar in that they are very versatile weapons that succeed in a variety of different engagements, I personally would go for the G36C. I find the recoil to be much more manageable, and it just seems to succeed at range a little bit more as a result. Also, the slightly faster reload also may be a factor, but really, even if the G36C might be a little bit better, it's only by a little, like only slightly or marginally better. Like, Both these weapons are extremely useful and versatile, and just because the G36C perhaps is slightly better, it doesn't make the G53 bad by any means. You know, maybe you think one just looks better than the other. I don't really know, but they're both wonderful weapons. I just happen to like the G36C a little bit better. And the final weapon on our list is the QBZ-95B. I think I try to do the same thing that you guys like to do with QBZ-95B. I try to make some sort of meaning out of it, you know, like quizzing baby zebras, 1995 basketball, but regardless, it has a maximum damage of 25 and a minimum damage of 14.3, firing at a rate of 650 rounds per minute with a magazine size to 30 rounds. It reloads in 3.1 seconds while empty and 2.5 seconds while not. That's fairly slow, but then it can cut it some slack because it's a bullpup. And it's also capable of firing fully automatic, burst, and single firing modes, which is, I want to say it's somewhat similar to the AKS-74U. You know, they both have that low rate of fire of 650 rounds per minute. And beyond their specific similarities, I like to think that the QBZ-95 performs slightly better in close quarters, and the AKS-74U performs slightly better at longer ranges. And allow me to explain myself. The recoil of the QBZ is much more horizontal compared to the AKS, so many of your bullets tend to miss to the left and to the right. While the AKS is much more vertically integrated with its recoil, that means that when you naturally aim for the chest when engaging an enemy, like most of us do, the recoil naturally brings your shots higher and gives you loads of headshots and loads of money and dosh and everything else. So this is why I think the AKS is better at range, but here's why I think the QBZ is better at close range. Okay. The fact that the weapon is a bullpup gives you the ability to walk around while aimed down sight with more mobility. You know, having a bullpup weapon in close quarters is much more convenient than having a non-bullpup weapon, if you will. Especially when it comes down to the weapons with the low rates of fire, like the AKS and the QBZ, walking around aimed down sight instead of hip firing can often be the difference between you killing the other catfish and the catfish killing you. However, I would definitely notice that these are slight differences. Like, you know, both weapons are great at range and not so great at close quarters, but mind you that these differences are marginal, and I really like using both these weapons basically equally. And I think that's about it. I think the only logical thing to do now is to make a post-patch LMG guide, and that should be out within the next couple of weeks. So in the meantime, enjoy your bonus clip, and I will see you guys next time. Auf Wiedersehen und bis bald, und give me yourself, dog, and later.